Council, February 28, 2011, to order. Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Here.
Here. Here. Present.
Present. Present.
Present. Is there a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the meeting?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. This time, I would like all persons to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and take a moment of silence for Mr. Ray Durfee. Councilman Santa Maria, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Announcement, Council President Lupino is out of town and will not be in attendance this evening. Also, Councilwoman Leslie Ann Luciano is ill with the flu. I'd like also to announce that starting with tonight's meeting, the City Council meetings will be televised and can be seen at 9 p.m. on Tuesday and Wednesday of the following week on Cox Cable Channels 17 and 18 and on Verizon Channels 30 and 36. Public acknowledgments and accommodations. This time, I'd like to ask the members of the Durfee family who are here tonight, Paul and Peter Durfee, to step forward while Councilman Navarro reads the proclamation and will present him on his behalf of the city. Councilman Navarro.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. It gives me great honor to present this to a very, very respected person in our community, the late Ray Durfee. And this is on behalf of the City Council and the Mayor. And this is a proclamation honoring Raymond Ray Durfee, April 25th, 1922 to February 2nd, 2011. Be it resolved that whereas the late Raymond Ray Durfee was a lifelong resident of Cranston who attended Cranston High School and graduated from Brown University, was a respected businessman, community leader, and statesman who served the city of Cranston for 16 years in the General Assembly. First as a member of the Rhode Island House of Representation for 8 years, and then as senator for the Rhode Island Senate for 8 more years, who then went on to serve as a delegate to the Rhode Island Constitutional Convention. Whereas Ray also served our country honorably as a member of the United States Navy during World War II, his ship landed the Marines on Iwo Jima and was first officer from New England called back for service during the Korean conflict. And whereas there is no doubt that Ray Durfee will always be remembered with fondness and affection as a proprietor and the owner of Durfee Hardware Store, which has become a Cranston landmark located at 1665 Royal Square, where he worked as a young boy when it was first opened by his parents in 1930 and later in 1960 under his management. And whereas not only will he be remembered by his many loyal customers, but by all Cranston for his efforts and public service, which significantly benefited the city of Cranston and its residents. But more especially, he will always be remembered for his kindness and gentlemanly manner, but especially for his bow ties, which became his daily trademark, as well as his sincerity and smile. So now, therefore, be it resolved that the Mayor and the Cranston City Council on the occasion of his passing on February 2nd, 2011, wish to express their appreciation for his dedicated and faithful public service, to express their condolences to his family. He will be greatly missed, where we by set our hands on this seal on the 28th day of February 2011.
Peter. Also like to recognize former councilman from the 6th Ward, Jeffrey Barone. There's no objection from the council. I'd like to have Paul Casey, the harbor master, sworn in at this time for his duties this evening. Mr. Casey? Swearing you in will be Councilman Stephen Stikos from the 1st Ward.
I'll say the oath and then you hopefully answer yes. Do you, Paul Casey, solemnly swear that you will be true and faithful unto and support the Constitution of the United States, this state, and support the laws and Constitution thereof, and the Home Rule Charter and ordinances of the City of Cranston, and that you will well and truly execute the office of Harbor Master to which you have been appointed, or until another engaged in your place, or until you be legally discharged therefrom. So help you God.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cates. Public hearings, limited to docket matters. Ordinance 1-11-07. Ordinance and amendment of Chapter 6.08 of the Code of the City of Cranston, 2005, entitled Dogs and Other Animals. Animals Confinement in Motor Vehicles as amended February 17, 2011. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on the amendment of this ordinance? Please state your name and address for the record.
Dennis Tabella, 363 Sergeant Street, Warwick, Rhode Island. City Council President, members of the Cranston City Council. Last year, this City Council voted on a proposed ordinance, which is now the law in Cranston, to protect dogs that were tied outside 24/7. In that ordinance, it protects dogs. It makes sure that dogs have adequate shelter, water, and food, just basic care. This ordinance before you tonight is, I believe, an extension of protecting dogs and cats. 14 states have this already in place. And it's a wide range of states. It's New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, New Jersey, California, Arizona, West Virginia, the Dakotas, Minnesota. It's pretty much across the United States, and it's already in place. The total population of those 14 states is well over 100 million people. And the point I'm trying to make is you have a lot of city solicitors, a lot of towns, and a lot of state representatives and a lot of state senators that saw this as something necessary. So basically, I would hope that the City Council in Cranston would also find this necessary. I think it's a good piece of legislation, and it's a good ordinance if you pass it. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak on any docketed matters? Okay, closing the public's portion. Next is the item is Braver City Auditor's Review of Management Letter from FY 2010. I ask the representatives from Braver please step forward. Please state your name and title for the record.
Good evening. I'm James Prescott, a partner at Braver PC, and with me tonight is Erica Alobri, who managed the job here at Cranston, the 6/30/10 audit. Tonight, I just want to review our findings, what we used to call management letter findings. They're a review of, or the result of, our audit, and they are the result of internal control deficiencies that we noted during our audit. You should know that we do not do a study of internal controls. We examine internal controls as a result of our audit to come to a conclusion upon the financial statements. And as such, when we're looking at these controls, we find errors or omissions or material mistakes, we're obligated to point them out to the governing body. You have 3 significant material deficiencies that we've noted. One has to do with the credit balances or prior year periods. We made a management comment the first year, a year ago, about how balances in the taxes receivable were being handled. We had discussions with the administration and with the audit committee over a period of time, and this year we actually came to a conclusion and made a entry that resulted in an increase of fund balance. We thought that the credit balances should be handled in a different way, and management in the city has agreed with us. So that's our first comment. It's a comment that is a result of a large entry that was made in the city's books, and we don't expect, obviously, the comment to be repeated. The second material weakness has to do with the government audit standards, GASB 34. About 6 or 7 years ago, the bodies, the GASB, the Government Audit Standards Board, wanted to have cities and towns and municipals report more as a business, and that's what they call this 34 Act. As a result, most communities keep their books and records and general fund on a fund basis, and they have not been set up to accommodate this 34 reporting requirement. So we come in and the financial statements have to be reported as such, and because the internal operation of the general ledger and the way the city reports its fund balances doesn't accommodate this, the auditors have to come up and make these entries and therefore create these financial statements. I can tell you I think we do over a dozen communities in this state. Every one of them has this comment, or 95% of them have this comment. It's a typical comment. Even though it's a material deficiency, it's something that all communities are struggling with because of the way they account for their records. And because we made a material adjustment, that's why we have to tell you about it. The third material weakness, it had to do with cutoffs. As part of our examination, we cut off or test cutoffs for revenue and payables and expenses. When we were doing those tests, we found some errors, and we had to make adjustments for that the administration has agreed to. Therefore, that's why this comment is in. We don't expect this to be a repeat comment in the future, or at least we're hoping that it won't be. It had primarily to do with Public Works and invoices that they received and didn't properly accrue, and therefore, when we make large adjustments, we have to tell you about them. The next comment is not a material weakness, but is something we think should be pointed out. It's a deficiency with the federal programs handled by the school department. There's a specific grant requirements that require that they do certain procedures, especially when it comes to keeping track of employees' time and effort in how they documented that. We found errors in the documentation of that. We don't think it complied with federal funds. They corrected it or are correcting it, and the city believes that all the compliance is done correctly now. Other comments, these are not material weaknesses, but things that just come to our attention during the audit, and some of them are just obvious, but we felt as though it should be put on paper. Fund balance deficit, there are several. If you look in some of the side funds and other funds here, obviously the school department. Those need to be dealt with, and that's what this comment is about. It's bringing it to your attention if you don't already know about it, but it's something we feel necessary to point out. Also, the pension plan, there's a unfunded liability, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. As of the end of the year, it was $245 million in the police and fire pension plan. Again, this is a comment that we're talking about because we feel it's necessary. It's an important financial issue for the city. Most communities have or are adopting a fraud prevention program. We don't think the city here has adopted a complete program. We're suggesting that that should be part of a documentation requirement so that people will know how to report fraud internally and also through the community, how the community can help report fraud. Our suggestion here is simply to adopt a program. Again, another liability that's not really out there in the financial statements, but it's a post-employment benefit liability. It's a significant number. There's no accrual for it. It's reported in the financial statements in the footnotes. It's disclosed. But again, we're pointing it out because it exists and some people should know about it. It's $50 million. And that's basically a quick summary of all the comments here.
Any members of the council have any questions? Councilman Navarro.
Question on some of the auditing, some of the practices or some of the recommendations you've made. A lot of these require, the specific one was on the general ledger accounting records. A lot of this would require software upgrades, correct?
Yes.
This is not something that the administration would be able to do with what we currently have now or make adjustments?
That's correct.
So for practical reasons, you're recommending some type of upgrades that would be able to switch from the way it's being done now to...
Yes, exactly. Yep. But I'll say, like I said earlier, that's there's hardly any communities that have the capability of doing this, even though it's a necessary function of reporting.
Mr. Strom.
Just to address Councilman Navarro, we do have in the process of upgrading our current system. It's a 3-year phase. The first year right now, we're working on general ledger, accounts payable, and purchasing. Next year, hopefully, the numbers will be approved in the budget for phase 2, and then the following year will be the conclusion of this phase in and upgrade. So hopefully with those upgrades, and moving some of the efficiencies related to the computer software, will be better. Right now, we're doing some of the things on Excel spreadsheets. That's some of the one of the criticisms of the audit. In the interim, we're hoping that it will filter through our software on our mainframe system so that we won't have this deficiency. It may take a period of a couple of years to get it implemented correctly.
All set, Councilman Navarro?
Yes, thank you.
I have one question. In your professional opinion, how does Cranston compare with other cities and towns with regarding the unfunded liability?
Oh, the unfunded liability. Do you have an opinion? I know it's pretty similar. I mean, we happen to do the audit of Providence, and Providence is much more significant than it is here. So almost every of these communities have a material issue of these unfunded liabilities.
Thank you.
It's hard. I don't know where to put Cranston on that scale, but it's like kids saying everybody else is doing it and
Right.
we're doing it too.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilman Favicchio.
Thank you, Vice.
some of these other issues that you raised are also addressed, I think, by the software issues and some of the programs that Mr. Strom discussed.
I think some of them, yes.
So,
Not the fraud prevention program, but some of the other ones. Well, certainly the cutoff testing should be a,
the government, the 34 standard federal
yeah,
reporting.
that's a tough one. But yes, that could be addressed by software upgrades.
And that's something that a lot of cities are not up to speed on, I would imagine.
I can't think of any, actually. In Rhode Island.
In Rhode Island.
Excuse me.
One other question there. I know that we had at one of our finance meetings, we are addressing part of that unfunded liability. There's a payment of, I think, $24 million per year
Yes,
going toward that, so it's not that we're not addressing it at all.
right, exactly. But like I said, I think that we wanted to put it on paper so people can digest it and talk about it.
Any other questions? Just a reminder to the council members, please speak into your microphone so we are recording. Also like to acknowledge School Committee Woman Stephanie Culhane. Welcome, Stephanie. All right, we'll move on to the report of committees as there are no docketed resolutions this evening.
Thank you.
Report on committees, Public Works, Councilman Navarro.
Thank you, Councilman Pelletier. Just a point of order on so you mentioned there are no docketed resolutions. Wasn't there a resolution that came out of Finance Committee? Wouldn't that be a...
Public Works.
Okay, so it wouldn't be under that, that's
Under your committee.
On the finance? Okay. Just- Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Okay, we have, on the Public Works, we have a resolution that was passed unanimously by the Public Works Committee. It was a resolution urging the mayor to look into the feasibility of creating pedestrian access between the post office and Auburn Library.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Stichels, seconded by Councilman Arquette. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Committee on Finance, Councilman Stichels, the Vice Chair.
We have a resolution, ordinance authorizing the expenditure of $40,000 in Western Road impact fees to construct a salt barn to prevent the salt from washing into the waterways.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion approved by Councilman Donahue and seconded by Councilman Arquette. Under discussion, Councilman Santa Maria.
Thank you, Council Vice President. I have a question, one more question on the agreement between the city and the contractor. There's a, right at the end, add alternate items. Can you explain that? It seems to give us two options on bituminous base and a modified. Do we get to pick the cheaper one? How does this work? And is it just an option? Do we have to?
Jerry?
Council Vice President, thank you. Yes, Councilman, there were a number of alt items that were listed on the original bid, and it was in an attempt to give us the opportunity to cafeteria style pick the best choice. And one of the things, the driving factors for this is the original ordinance provided a budget estimate of $290,000. And because these numbers were coming in over that, we did the cafeteria version in order to get it as close as we could to the 290. And that version that you're looking at that was chosen, I believe, at 296, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that neighborhood, 298, I'm sorry, basically left out the hard floor and the lighting, which is now what we're looking for funding for.
Okay, and can we possibly get a estimated time of completion?
Estimated time of completion, I can tell you that the variance on height was passed, and the foundation has started pending weather, and the materials for the building have been ordered. As far as the actual completion date, I can't answer that right now, but I can get it for you.
But we're moving along.
We're moving along.
Thank you, Council
We'll have a
President.
salt barn for next season.
Good. Anyway, and then it won't snow, watch.
We have a motion on the floor and a second. Any other discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes.
Next, we have a resolution urging the governor and the General Assembly to speed up the new school funding formula, and that would financially benefit the city of Cranston.
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. Motion approved for Councilman Arquette, and who seconded it? Councilman Donahue. Any other discussion? Councilman Navarro.
Yeah, Councilman Pelletier, thank you. The, just a quick question, Councilman Pelletier. I see that you're a sponsor on this. The, and I'd like to be added as a sponsor as well, for the record.
Clerk,
I just
please,
read one- I
please
just
make
read
that note.
One portion of it where it says that part of this resolution is to ask the General Assembly not to use, is this not to use, or not to use federal funds here, federal education funds? I guess former Governor Kuchera proposed as a plug-in hole. Is there something that, to the thought that maybe we won't get this funding formula for the city of Cranston? Is that part why this resolution has been come forth and you've been sponsored?
Yes. I believe the resolution came forward just to expedite the payment processes to all the cities and towns for the funding of the formula.
All right, no, specifically on the section 2, it's talking about a plug-in, that this was the 2011 budget, that this money was used as a plug-in hole for, under like the state budget. So I just wanted to get an idea of, is that something going on in the General Assembly regarding this education funding form? Is it maybe going to change or something to that effect, or is it being used maybe possibly to plug a budget hole or something? I just want to get a clarification on that.
All right,
But anything to get this money to us, believe me, I want to be a sponsor on it. I just question, what the reason is.
All right. Madam Clerk, will you note that Councilman Navarro would like to be added as a sponsor? And Mr. Warner, could you please address Councilman Navarro's question?
Yes, sir. Councilman, the federal government has given or allocated $31 million to the state of Rhode Island for this fiscal year. Governor Kuchera, instead of passing that money on to school systems or municipalities, has chosen or had chosen to use it to balance this year's budget for the state. What this resolution is asking is to send the money to the schools and to the towns where it was intended.
All set, Councilman Navarro?
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Councilman Santa Maria.
Thank you, Council Vice President. How much would we get if this were to pass? It says, would we get $10,880,000?
I believe the answer is yes, Councilman Santa Maria.
Okay, and the chances of this passing?
It's got to go through the General Assembly.
I hate to sound negative, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Arquette.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just want to urge my colleagues to support this measure. I think education funding is at the bare minimum. We need to have a different formula. I think Cranston would benefit greater from this new formula. So I hope the General Assembly gets the message. Thank you.
Any other discussion? I'd like to add my 2 cents. Although this funding formula money is a great bonus to the city of Cranston as well as many cities and towns, my only apprehension is that what's going to happen at the end of the term of this money, will Cranston be shortchanged in the long run? So that's my only concern. Any other discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next is a resolution authorizing real estate and tangible tax abatements that are recommended by the assessor.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion approved by Councilman Navarro, seconded by Councilman Arquette. Any other discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
And then we have a resolution on motor vehicle tax abatements. These are usually because there's a series of them, but because the car was sold mid-year or there was some error made that assessor wishes to correct.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion approved by Councilman Favicchio. Do I have a second? Second by Councilman Stichels. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Next is tax interest waivers recommended by the city treasurer. This was referred, because we got the information late, the committee merely referred this to the full council without a recommendation. But I'd like to request a motion to approve it so that we can discuss it.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Councilman Stichels.
Okay, I reviewed these interest waivers, and I think many of you may have received an email that Robin sent out in response to my questions on 3 of them, and I think, to keep things short, the reasoning made sense in 2 of them, but in a 3rd, I don't think it does. And that's in the case of Michael Rodriguez. And what I have first of a question. It was unclear from the answer whether the city treasurer was recommending this interest waiver or was merely passing it on to the council because it was more than $250, and anything more than $250 is kind of not in his ballpark.
Robin?
I believe that if it was on the original list of recommendations to approve, then he did recommend it for approval. He actually, whether they're if they're over 250, whether he approves it or denies it, he puts it on either way. He doesn't send it forward without recommendation. So if it had been on your original list for approval, then he did recommend approval. He doesn't put it on there and just sort of toss it to you. He would review it first. If it's over 250 and he doesn't think it's a good idea, he recommends it as a denial.
Well, in the email, he felt strongly about, as I said, there were 3 that I objected to, or questioned. He felt strongly about one, and I think with good reason. And then the other 2 he was less strong on. And when you look at the backup for the Rodriguez request, there is, I can find it here in the packet, treasure hunt. Let's see. Yeah, it's about in the middle, right? There we go. Okay, there's a letter, and the letter says, the letter's to Mr. Capuano, and it says, it's pretty brief. Per our conversation, I'm requesting that you waive the entire amount of interest, $462 assessed to our account as a result of a late tax payment. As we discussed, we have been a homeowner in Cranston since 1988 and have never been late in a tax payment. I am requesting that you waive the entire amount based on our flawless tax payment record. I know that you understand that these are difficult times for everyone, and I ask for your compassion in this matter.
I do believe, oh, I'm sorry, I do believe that Mr. Capuano actually physically sat down and met with these people as well prior to his supporting their waiver.
Oh, it does sound like he did, but there's nothing in this letter that indicates that under the city code that this person is eligible for an interest waiver. And so I'm going to make a amendment to if there, do you have any other information on that?
I don't have further specific information than what you would have on that. He did meet with them personally. It is his recommendation, and I certainly trust his judgment as treasurer on this. Again, it's in the council's purview to make that call from there.
Also, Councilman, based on their experience, history, dealing with various taxpayers, oftentimes when a taxpayer has a problem in making his taxes on a timely basis, if it only occurs one time in the history that the taxpayer is made payment, they often give him a break for the interest that's involved. If it's reoccurring, they won't allow it. But if it's a one-time type of incident, they had, based on discussions with the taxpayer, they sometimes allow it.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. If Councilman Stichels has an issue with that item on the docket, I suggest he withdraws that from the main body and we vote on that separately.
I'm gonna withdraw my motion then at that point to approve, because I mean, we're approving them as a block, I take it, so that's the motion I put forth, so. What's that? Yeah, I had made a motion to approve, so that was the recommendation from the city treasurer, so at that point, I'll just remove my recommendation to approve them as a block, and we can take that one out and make another motion.
I think I seconded that. Did I
Yep,
second?
no.
No?
Councilman Navarro withdrew his motion for approval, so that nullifies them as a block.
Okay,
And Councilman Arquette withdrew his second.
all right, I'll
So
move.
currently, there is no motion on the floor.
Okay, I would then make a motion that we approve the tax interest waivers recommended by the city treasurer with the, is it the treasurer? Right, city treasurer with the exception of Michael Rodriguez.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll as amended.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes.
Next, there are two interest waiver denials that are recommended by the city treasurer. I'll make a motion for approval of that.
Excuse me,
Sorry.
excuse me one second, Councilman Stichels.
Council Vice President, the other tax interest waivers were approved as a block,
The one that we just ignored.
but
The one we-
yeah, but there's been no affirmative action either way taken on the one that was left off the block. So I think that has to be in its own separate motion either way.
So Councilman Stichels, you need to, or somebody needs to make a motion to either approve or deny the one that we withdrew.
All right, I'll make a motion that we deny the Rodriguez request for an interest waiver.
Is there a second? There's a second. Any discussion? Now you're voting to deny. Councilman Fagavicchio.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Do we know, is this decision based on the length of time that the individuals have owned the property and/or the age of the individuals? I'd like to know what the factors are in determining whether to go over the $250 limit, which is not required, does not require our approval.
Mr. Kirschbaum.
If the council has questions on this particular individual, what I would suggest is that we move this to the next Finance Committee meeting, and maybe the treasurer could be present to discuss the reasons why he suggested that the council approve it rather than guess and figure out why ourselves, with him not being present.
I agree, Attorney Kirschenbaum. There's a motion to continue by Councilman, to continue to the next Finance Committee meeting by Councilman Arquette.
Second.
There's a second by Councilman Santa Maria. So now the motion on the floor is we're going to continue this to the next Finance Committee meeting. Any other discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes. Yes? Yes.
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 Okay,
Motion will be-
now we have denials recommended by the city treasurer. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Motion by Councilman Navarro and seconded by Councilman Donahue. Who made the second? Councilman Stichels. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Next, the committee's recommending the approval of two cases that were returned to the committee by the council last month for tax interest waiver for Ida Campagnon and Robert Hambarzumian.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
Motion by Councilman Donahue, seconded by Councilman Navarro. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes. No. Yes.
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 Next, we have a financial report from the internal auditor, Steve Warner.
Thank you. This is the same report that was given at the Finance Subcommittee. I have an update on the snow costs. Through last Thursday, they've been posted, so there still may be bills outstanding. But the overtime now is about $100,000 over budget. The vendors, the contractors are $350,000 over budget. Supplies are $110,000 under budget, and repairs are $25,000 under budget. Now, there is a snow and ice reserve fund of about $260,000 that can be used if the administration so desires. I've listed some of the major variances, but outside of the snow, and I also want to point out that my understanding is that a purchasing freeze has been put in by the administration. But anyway, it looks like we'll be close to break even except for the snow issues. Are there any questions?
Robin.
If I could just quickly follow up on the snow question. One of the things that's been asked is why There've been a lot of comparisons out between other communities and us, and one of the questions is why Warwick's snow budget appears so much lower than Cranston's. If I could address one thing, we hire vendors, which are costly, but we hire them on a per-storm basis, which gives us the control. If you compare our numbers directly to Warwick, it's a little bit of an apples to oranges, because Warwick has a trash collection staff as well as a sewer staff. So they have more full-time employees in their public works department year-round doing other functions. So because we are set up differently and we have certain things privatized, we don't have as much year-round staff. That benefits us in a good winter when there aren't a lot of major storms. But in a winter like this, we have the cost of the vendors coming in. So if you are looking at comparative numbers, if you look at those municipal surveys, as you are comparing, that is one of the things to keep in mind. I would add that. But Mr. Warner's right, it's been a tough winter.
Councilman Stichels.
So, Robin, to get your point, so because we contracted out the sewer plant, those people don't do any plowing.
Those are not employees of the city of Cranston.
Right.
We would not, and nor would we. We'd be hiring Veolia to plow, no different than we would hire another vendor. We would actually have to pay them for an additional service. Waste management collects our trash. It's a matter of bodies. They have a larger, no, just like our people do cross jobs, recreation comes over to help us, for instance. They may have trash collection people who hop in snow plows. They may have equipment that they can put plows on that we don't necessarily have. My point is that it's not a direct comparison. Municipalities that have certain portions of their public works departments privatized, like Providence, for example, need to call in vendors because you can't cover your whole city with your staff. In the long run, I believe it's a cheaper approach because you don't have pension contributions, health care. In a bad winter, it might cost you more one year, but in the next year, if you have a milder winter, basically our rule of thumb is if it's less than 4 or 5 inches of snow, we can handle it in-house. We've had a lot of storms this year, and a disproportionate number of storms based on our experience that have put us over that this year.
Do we have the equipment? If we had more people, would we have the equipment for them to plow?
No, because with other departments like sewer, for instance, you might have more trucks. They might not all be 10 wheels, but you'd have more pickup trucks. We would have to increase the fleet as well, which would then increase insurances and maintenance and fleet maintenance and whatnot. So it's all factors combined that have to be looked at. That's why I just brought this up, because it is a bit of an apples to oranges.
Councilman Santa Maria.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Steve or Bob, either one, car taxes percentage rate, we budgeted, I believe, 91%. Where are we with car tax collection percentage-wise? I know we have another quarter to go.
Mr. Strom.
I'm going to have to get back to it because right now it's consolidated together. Right now our collections are going well. I need to look at intangibles, car tax, and also real estate. I would say at this point, there was a lot of activity in the last few days with the people that registered their cars from March 1st. There's a lot of activity with treasury. So until I can see the end of the month's figures, I can report back to you for the committee meetings and let you know the breakdown of each class.
That'd be great. If I could have that for the next Finance Committee meeting?
Clerk, will you make a note of Councilman Santa Maria's request?
Thank you.
Councilman Donahue.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Either to the internal auditor or to Director Strom, do we have a sense of where the schools are running on their budget?
We do, and that should have been in your package from the Finance Department. They prepare a monthly report for us. I believe they are projecting approximately a $250,000 deficit for this year.
We just have to check, right now, in January, Steve is correct, it's about 260. And since through January, it's dropped to 192. That's their projection. So they had some favorable figures with Lincoln's healthcare and some of the other line items. It's running about 200,000 just. But that has to be monitored on a monthly basis because then we finish from that.
And
They're having problems with tuitions to outside schools. That's about a $500,000 problem, I believe.
And for clarification, the new contract for food services with Sodexo that guarantees minimum contribution, do we have a sense of where that is?
No, I don't. They've told me time and time again that that is the case. I just don't know. But I've been told that the amount of lunches being purchased is up significantly, and that's helping out the situation.
Just to follow up on that, there's a guarantee of approximately around about $400,000. Based on my discussions with the school department, we should meet that goal. It is running hard.
And Bob, is that being accrued in the current financial statements, or is that going to be put in at the end?
Basically, the audience was speaking about some negative balances. Right now, the food service has approximately 700, almost 800,000 deficit number. Based on the guarantee, if it holds up to that, which Sodexo has stated to the school department, in 2 years that will pay off. So that negative balance will be down to zero.
Thank you.
Just for the record, I just saved the city a bunch of money by turning down the heat. It's on 82. Councilman Stichels.
When a taxpayer pays interest for late payment, where is that recorded? Is that recorded in the tax collection figure on revenue?
No, there's a separate line item. Basically, it's delinquent interest, but it's a separate line item. And I don't, off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the budget amount is.
Oh, it's delinquent? It's that number?
Yes. No, delinquent is prior year taxes. We budget our tax collections, both the current year, which is just over 98% collection estimate, and then delinquent taxes, which is about $1 million, $1.1 million, sometimes $1.3 million. And then there's a separate line item where we capture the interest paid on delinquent taxes.
Mr. Strom.
Follow up on the question that Councilman Stichels had. There's a line item, it's called, numerically, it's 41711, and the description is interest and penalty on property tax. There is a line item for that, Council. And I have a revenue report, if you'd like to see that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Also like to state that due to the snowstorms that we've had as the emergency management liaison, the way the storms came in sometimes during the week, it made it very difficult to get the plow crews out there. And plus, we were down several trucks due to breakdowns. So that's why we had to rely heavily on the vendors. Right, correct. He did a fabulous job repairing our trucks.
You are absolutely correct, we had several trucks go down, and extremely
Thank you. Moving on, Ordinance Committee, Councilman Arquette. Report on ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. One item was passed through Ordinance Committee 111-07, ordinance and amendment of Chapter 6.08 of the Code of the City of Cranston, titled Dogs and Other Animals, Animal Confinement in Motor Vehicles, as amended February 17, 2011. Entertain a motion to approve.
A motion to approve. Anybody got a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilman Navarro.
Second.
Second by Councilman Favicchio. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Ordinance passes. Moving on. Safety Services and License Committee, Councilman Santa Maria.
Thank you, Council Vice President. We have a Class B victualling new license, JVC LLC DBA Galaxy Restaurant, 957 Reservoir Avenue.
Is there-
This was sent to zoning for zoning approval, and it passed the committee, and I recommend passage.
Is there a motion? Motion approved by Councilman Arquette. Second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Donahue. Any discussion? You here to speak for?
There's no public comment.
Yes. Councilman Navarro.
I just have a question regarding, I know it says over the cap, where are we exactly with the number on that?
73?
71? Thank you.
Ma'am, this is only for the ordinances and through committee. The opportunity to speak for docketed items was earlier, but there'll be another opportunity later.
If I may, I'm the attorney for the applicant, and I'm actually standing in for his counsel who's out ill this evening.
Okay, but there's still no discussion on it. So you can either speak after we're done. There'll be another section on undocketed items, so you can speak again later.
Thank you. And when will the vote take place?
Right now.
Right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Ordinance 11101, ordinance amending sections 1025.020, 1025.020, 1032.020, 1032.030 of the City Code, 2005 Motor Vehicles and Traffic. This is codifying all existing undocumented stop.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Ordinance passes.
Ordinance 11102, ordinance amending section 1032.020, City of Cranston, 2005, entitled Motor Vehicles and Traffic, a stop sign at Hobson Ave at Frankfurt Street. Committee is met and recommends approval.
Is there a motion? Motion approved by Councilman Arquette. We have a second.
Second?
Second by Councilman Stichels. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes.
Ordinance 11103, ordinance amending section 1032.030, Motor Vehicles and Traffic, for a three-way stop at Garden Hills Parkway and Garden Hills Drive. Committee is met and recommends approval.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Favicchio and second by Councilman Donahue. Any discussion? I'd just like to say this is the third time the stop sign's been in and out, for the record, and I can't wait for it to go back in. Clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Hell yeah. Claims Committee, Councilman Stichels.
We have here the payment of 3 claims that were authorized by the Claims Committee. Dorothy Miller was for an accident with a fire truck. Robert Chatfield was an accident with a public works vehicle. And then the auto rental is payment to Chatfield for a car rental for the time that his car was out of service. somewhat embarrassing, but I didn't realize this. These are, we can vote to ratify them, but they're done. I mean, there's been a settlement. So if all of us voted no, they'd still be settled. But- So
right.
I don't know why we have them on the agenda, frankly. If we're going to authorize the Claims Committee to settle claims, it doesn't really make sense to have them here except for notice. But they are noticed, and I don't know what people want to do with this.
Ms. Schutt.
If I want to give a little history just to point out how this evolved, because you and I have had this discussion. Originally, the Claims Committee did not settle these types of claims. This was under what was called the Insurance Risk Commission. It was approved by a commission, settled, and it was not a council. Council members were on the commission, but it did not go through the council for approval. At the time, the Claims Committee was established years ago when the city pension, when an IOD and the city pension were determined by a committee before we farmed out the IOD. So the Claims Committee, the original intent of the Claims Committee was not to even settle these types of things, which may be why it evolved into a process that you're scratching your head about and saying, why are we voting on something that's already settled? Because these types of claims were never even handled by the Claims Committee initially. And I know Council Stichels and I talked about looking at this whole situation. And at the next council meeting, and the next Claims Committee meeting, I'd be happy to address some possible ideas that we may have. But that explains why, a little bit of the history of this. This committee was never designed, the Claims Committee was never designed to settle these types of claims. Because after the committee votes on it, you have to offer the settlement to the person. They agree with it, so that's why even if you voted no, the person's already agreed to the settlement. So that's how the convoluted here is.
Is there a motion?
Well, what the heck, let's ratify them.
Throwing the dice. The motion. Is there a motion? Motion by Councilman Navarro. Do I got a second? Second by Councilman Arquette. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Public hearings, open to any matters. Any members of the public wish to speak on any undocketed items? Please come up.
Council Vice President?
Yep. Councilman Santa Maria,
If I
before
may,
we
before we
begin.
start public hearings, a couple of council people, including myself, would like to withdraw Robert Haratunian for the time being for reappointment to the Tax Assessment Board of Review.
Councilman Santa Maria, you're recognized as removing Mr. Haratunian from the Tax Assessment Board of Review.
Thank you.
Councilman Arquette, did you have something to say? All set. Please step forward, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Elizabeth Green. I live at 106 Westcott Avenue.
How you doing?
I'm here to address a concern that I have regarding the parking in the stadium area when there's an event at Cranston East Football Stadium. I happen to live on the smallest street in the neighborhood. There's no signs on either side of the street stating that you cannot park there, so of course they park both sides of the street. I have a disabled mother who, thank God, at any of these events hasn't had to have an ambulance called, but if we ever did, it would never get down the street. I have an SUV and can't get down the street sometimes or into my driveway. So I would like to see possibly even signs just go up just stating, you know, during events that they can't park on both sides of the street. One side is fine, but to do both sides, it's a, you know, a safety hazard and it just needs to be fixed.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak? Please state your name and address for the record, Mr. Valletta.
Paul Valletta, representing the Cranston Firefighters, Local 1363. I wanted to talk about a docketed item, but also I just want to remind, under executive communications, oh, Ms. Schutt's over here. Under executive communications, under Charter, the Section 1505, we've just been informed that Mr. Augusta has been hired to handle 2 recently filed grievances. Under that charter language, the administration has to let you know tonight how much his fee is and what the pay arrangements are going to be. Can't get up here and say they'll get you that figure. Under this charter section, they have to inform the city council tonight how much Mr. Augusta's fee is and what his pay is going to be and what his fee arrangement's going to be. So that's under executive communications. So I hope that happens. The other issue I come before you tonight is on the, under Council President Communications, the fire command assistance to the town of Johnston. I brought this to the council's attention at the last meeting. I told you what it was all about. I told you that it was a labor problem between the mayor of Johnston and the firefighters union, and the city of Cranston was getting involved in it by agreeing to send their command staff to the town of Johnston if they needed it. Now, if the town of Johnston, their command staff retired tomorrow, then the firefighters union in Cranston would have no problem sending our deputy chiefs, our chief, or anybody else they needed. For that fact, to any community if their command staff retired tomorrow. That's not the case in Johnston. The reason they're requesting the city of Cranston's command staff to be available is because there is a labor problem between the mayor and the firefighters union. That's why. That's all this is about. This isn't about mutual aid. That's what this is about. The town of Johnston has an assistant fire chief in place presently that by contract is supposed to be moved up to the chief's position in his absence. They have three battalion chiefs, and one of those firefighters should be moved up to assistant chief. Much like we have in the city of Cranston, that's what we do. If the fire chief is not available, the assistant chief moves up. Well, because of this labor problem, the mayor of Johnston has appointed himself the fire chief instead of following the collective bargaining agreement. And he has appointed the deputy police chief to be the administrative fire chief of the fire department. So he didn't even have the decency to make the assistant chief to keep his position. He moved the police chief and the police major into that position. So this is clearly a union issue that the city of Cranston has stuck their nose into. Now, in good economic times, I guess if one mayor wanted to help another mayor when he was putting the screws to a union, this would be okay. And there are probably some people in this room that are saying that the command staff of the fire department, the union has no say in that. And they'd be right. We don't run the fire department. The fire chief runs the fire department. But what gives me the right to stand up and say that is the $5 million that the firefighters have given back in concessions in the last 3 years while we had a contract. What gives me that right is other things we've done for the city, working with the police chief, the fire chief. I guess when they put police chiefs in charge, that's what made me slip. But working with the fire chief, that on day-to-day operations and things that we've saved the city money that you don't even know, probably administration doesn't even know. An example is when they had the flu clinic at Parkview School, the firefighters did that. And we came back, no overtime, no money. We came back to do that for the city. And we do that all the time. And that's what gives me the right to stand up here today and say that. The concessions we've made, we're in the middle of a 3-year pay freeze, which a lot of people probably don't even know. And we don't need a pat on the back. Everybody's experiencing bad times. But think of the message this sends to your firefighters who have come to the table, given back all this money, and now the city of Cranston is getting involved with a labor issue in another town where it could cost the city of Cranston money. If we send our deputy chiefs to Johnston to run their fires, you have to call back by contract. You have to have a deputy chief in the city of Cranston. So you call back and you got to pay overtime for that deputy chief. Now, I don't see why in these economic times, when you're going to have some very serious decisions to make in the next 2 months, as is the administration, why would you put Cranston in that position? Why would you send that message? I can guarantee if you asked every citizen of Cranston, whether they like the firefighters or not, they would disagree with this policy that the administration and the fire administration wants to put in place. Now, I don't expect this to change. They're going to go to the town of Johnston. Nothing's going to change because we don't make the rules. But I just thought you should know this, and I thought the citizens should know this, that in these economic times, when everybody's coming back and helping out, this is the kind of message that's sent to a bargaining unit that has helped, that we're going to go into a town, not that they need assistance because they don't have the people to do it, not that they need assistance because their command staff retired, because the mayor's playing games with the unions, and we stuck our nose into it. And I know my fire chief is here, and I guess this is what he's gonna testify against, and he may get up here and disagree with some of the things I say. And he may say it's not gonna cost any money, because he's gonna go to the fires, and he gets comp time. Well, he's not gonna be available 24 hours a day. Somebody's gonna have to go there. And I hope he's not gonna get up here and say this is mutual aid, because he knows this is not mutual aid. This is not under the mutual aid agreement. And I'm gonna close with this. 7 years ago, this happened in the city of Cranston, and it happened to the gentleman that's going to testify. He was the assistant chief, and he should have been promoted. But at the time, the mayor of the city of Cranston didn't like the union, so he didn't get promoted when he should have. And everybody knows that. And he knows how he felt back then when that mayor played games with people being promoted. He knows how I felt, because I have the utmost respect for him. And he knows how the Cranston firefighters felt when we know he got screwed out of a promotion. And that's what's happening in Johnston right now. They are failing to move these people up and even put them in acting roles. Even if they're not going to get the permanent jobs, they should be moved up into the acting roles. And I hope he remembers the feeling we had for him back then, because that's what Cranston is doing right now. Thank you for your time.
Any other members from the public wish to speak on any undocketed items?
Hi, my name's Dolores Sisler, 108 Eldridge Street. And as we're talking about snow removal and spending money and salt barns and the likes, I would like to touch on a letter that I sent January 24th to my city councilman as well as Councilman Lupino, the mayor, Representative Arthur Handy, Senator Josh Miller, that addresses the fact that we still have people living in the Patuxent riverbed that flooded last March. We're coming up on that season again. I have a nice article here from February 12th, Cranston Herald, where a hydrologist from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration gave a presentation here saying that the snowfall is compacted into shorter periods here and on and on and on, and essentially he expects another 14-foot river crest this spring. I attached for you as well what a 14-foot river crest involves, which is certainly evacuation, businesses, residents. You get to 16, serious potential life-threatening flood situation. We don't seem to have any compulsion to get people out of the bottom of the riverbed, nor do I really care to have my police and fire or anybody else that works for the city going in there risking their lives for something that we know is coming. So I would ask you again to look at this issue and at least reply to the letter. That would be customary. I would also like to say that December 20th I spoke on this issue, and I just want to address the minutes that say that I spoke on my concerns and the cost to go into the Riverbend apartment area. No, folks are living in a riverbed. There's nothing you're going to do to fight that river. It's insanity to continue to spend our money and risk people's lives. So whatever has to be done by ordinance, by state law, we need to move it forward. Thank you.
Any other members from the public wish to speak?
Good evening. My name's Tim Pullen from 670 Leighton Knight Road. Just wanted to introduce myself to the council as well as my fellow residents. I'm here tonight for appointment to the Board of Contract and Purchase. Just wanted to identify myself to you. I look forward to this meaningful work and the role that I'll play with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pullen. Anyone else?
Dick Tomlins, 400 Farmington Avenue. For this new session, this is my maiden voyage, but since you don't have a full council, I'll leave some of the things I wanted to say till the time that there is one. But hearing a couple of things tonight. First of all, Paul, hearing what you said tonight, being a senior acolyte in our church, I can easily say amen. But beyond that, I would question, anyone that's sent up there, they're in somewhat unfamiliar territory. What would be the case if that person got injured on the job in Johnston? Number one, but overriding everything, why one city would get involved. I followed that case pretty closely. Why anyone would get involved in another, this is pure politics, and we should not be involved. Now, what the gentleman talked about earlier about business. I go back to when I was business managers in universities and established several 5013Cs in other parts of my life. And one of my maiden speech, if you will, I always said, we're not a business, but we must be run business-like. What you have without that, you have bookkeeping versus maybe more accounting. And it allows for things to go on in the budget that come up all of a sudden, that they're somehow in the budget, or they're transferred in the budget, or they're revisited in the budget, that doesn't give you the full story at the outset. That is a must. I understand about software, and I understand it takes time once you approve the software to get any part of it in service, and you got to go on a trial run and all that, but I would certainly think we should try to pick up the pace. It's a must, an absolute must. And if we do that, I think we'll be a lot better off. Also, I don't quite understand, unless I'm missing something here, there's a lot of meetings going on that I don't know about, that's a question about what's going on in the schools, in their budget, their current budget. I've attended all of their meetings. I think more council members should attend those meetings. It doesn't matter so much as to where they are today. As far as the food service, it's been made clear as to what the savings has been projected, what the savings have been guaranteed, and I believe it's $300,000. Beyond that, for the next budget, they just voted tonight to finalize it in a quickie, that they're $3.5 million in the hole. But that assumes that the city's going to give more money. And now they have to, I understand by statute or ruling, they have to include in that the $1.5+ million that they owe the city each year for the next, for the next 4 years. So it's a lot more than $3.5 million, because they're not going to get what they have in that budget from the city unless there's some miracle coming down the street somewhere. And I don't think there is any. So I think, and they're 53% of the budget. It just boggles my mind that right now and before now that this council isn't more involved. They are now speaking. Mr. Lombardi said at the last meeting, we are now, and a couple of the members were there from the council. Now we appeal to the council members, the administration. We got to sit down and work this out together. Amen, amen. And you also know, you should know, that Mr. Bloom has come up with a 5-year plan for them that I've been talking about that the city should be doing for at least 1.5 years. Everybody's talking about it now. Maybe I was a year ahead of myself. But I don't think it takes a mental giant to figure out that you cannot run in this climate. You never could. If anybody's read this book, folks, this is the history of Cranston, pretty well documented. Deja vu, deja vu, deja vu. Same way with the snow plowing. We've heard that all along, whether we should go out and do a cost-benefit on plowing and whether we could use more equipment and more men to do other things to cut out this vendor relationship. You know what this book tells us? It's replete with administrations going soliciting funds from our vendors. That would preclude some of that, at least in this instance. But what this council has to do, and should be, I would suggest that maybe the two presidents go after the administration. The mayor has to lead on this problem. There is no way you will solve the financial condition in this city.
Tomlin, can you speed up a little bit? You're coming past 4.5
Yeah, I'll
minutes.
speed up, all right. I hope the council will speed up, and I hope you will speed up, all right? Paul spoke more time than I did, all right? So I recognize that. So I do object to your calling me at this time. I want that in the record. Now, what we have to have done here is for the administration, and maybe you don't approve of that, Mr. Vice President, and that's why you want to cut me off. I don't know. We could have a discussion on that. But if you don't get leadership from that part, you're going to have a school system that falls apart. You're going to have a city that falls apart. The budget has to be sent. You have good minds here. You have good minds over there. And you'll need somebody from the outside to help establish a 5-year plan that is recognized by everybody, that every single element, Paul talks about what the police the firemen has done. I'd like to think he would like to sit in the room with the firemen, the police, the teachers, all the unions, and say, here it is, folks, what can we do to make this city fiscally solvent? If you don't do that, you're remiss in your duty, and quite frankly, if that doesn't happen, you don't deserve the positions you hold. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak on any undocketed items?
Through the chair?
Yes, Ms. Clark.
For the record, I'd just like to inform the speaker that we did have the timer on for Mr. Valletta also. It just didn't go off. I had to obtain a new timer. He did go over the 4 minutes, but it wasn't intentional.
Good evening, everyone. Sean Gately, 14 Owl Court. Just wanted to take a moment to speak as we were here earlier and hearing from what the gentleman said from Braver PC, and to address what Ms. Isler was talking about in the River Valley. But quite frankly, Cranston is flooded, and we're all drowning in a horrible, horrible unfunded liability here in the city. You add up the numbers of $245 million unfunded pension liabilities, the OPEB, the other pension, other personal employment benefit liability that's out there. And if I looked at the thing, I believe it went from 31 million in 2009 to 50 million in 2010. It would seem to me that the city doesn't have money enough to fund it again this year. And if we're looking at increasing our liability from a 19 million from 09 to 010, you include all the other additional costs in there, it's probably going to put it up to, I don't know where we're going to end up at, 70, 75 million in the OPEB, on top of 245 million. Plus, we've got a school committee budget that's going to be coming in front of you. We're going to have another $6 million hole sitting out there. We've got Carrillo action sitting in front of us. We raised our car taxes. Your resolution earlier in this meeting about the $32 million in federal funds, it's a great resolution, but they've got a $300 million deficit. They're not going to cut that check down to you guys. So we're facing one of the most devastating financial crises in this city in probably quite a long time, since back when the banking crisis happened in the early 90s. And the only thing I ask you, and I'm speaking on behalf of being a taxpayer in this city who's watched his taxes go through the roof, where I have to make choices about where my children's education, I have to make choices about where I have to buy my groceries, what kind of automobiles that I drive. There are people in this city right now that can no longer afford to live here. There are senior citizens living in areas that are on fixed incomes who can't afford to pay their mortgages on their houses because their property taxes keep going up. I just came to ask you all, on behalf of the taxpayers and on behalf of the different organizations where we're working on BEPs and all the different types of cuts, please have the intestinal fortitude and the temerity to make the right decisions that are coming in front of you in the very near future. We cannot raise taxes anymore. I love this place. I want to live here forever. And you're making that decision much more difficult. And your decisions coming up in the very near future are going to be very important, not only for our future, but the future of our children and the future of Cranston as a whole. Thank you very much.
Any other members from the public wish to speak? Seeing none, moving right along. Election of city officials. Board of Contracts and Purchases. I call upon Councilman Navarro as Majority Leader to announce his appointment.
Thank you, Councilman. Tim Pullen did come up and did speak and introduce himself to the council. Everyone got his resume in their packet, and he's very well qualified. And it's a very important appointment as far as service to the city with purchasing, and that meets twice a week. I'm sorry, that meets every 2 weeks, so it meets bi-monthly. So it's a very it's a big commitment, time commitment, and sometimes it's tough to find good people. But this gentleman has the qualifications, and he's going to do a very good service for the city and keep an eye on all the purchasing as well as the rest of that board. That's their job, and I'm glad he accepted. Thank you.
Mr. Pullen, you want to come up and say a few words? Or you're all set? Oh, you already left? All right. All right, on behalf of the council president, I'm reappointing Mark Parati of the Board of Contracts and Purchases also. And Amy Signier to the Flood Commission. All right, moving along to report of the city officers. Are there any report of city officers? Madam Clerk has none. Executive communications. Report on hiring special counsel.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. As you know, when we hire new attorneys, I certainly inform you. In fact, several months ago, I believe I informed you when we brought Dan Kinder on for a particular issue. Mr. Augusta has been a longstanding labor attorney. This council's been fully aware of that. You have received your monthly packet and the numbers that are on there. If you need an hourly rate broken down for Mr. Augusta, I certainly can get that for you. But you see all his legal bills in front of you, so there's really nothing further to disclose. Any specifics on what someone's hired for certainly can be discussed in executive session. As far as other reports from me, I believe I have submitted the police monthly report and the fire monthly report regarding their work and their efforts over the past 2 months, or the past month as usual, on both sides of the house. Great public service. Thank you.
Is there any discussion?
If I might also, Mr. Warner mentioned a purchasing freeze. I'm sure you are all going to hear about that. I'm sure my directors won't be terribly happy. We've been pretty stringent on purchase orders throughout. The rumor is that once it comes to my desk, it typically gets denied once and then has to be resubmitted and asked for again. At this point, we have pretty much put in emergencies, critical operations, and anything except for petty cash expenditures are going to come across my desk.
Thank you, Robin. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Moving on to Council President Communications. This time, I would like to announce Councilwoman Luciano's appointment to the Claims Committee Vice Chair. Is there any report from the administration on 179 Kearney Street? Mr. Cordy.
Yes, Council Vice President. There is a new owner. The new owner has met with the mayor and the building inspector. We've shared with them our expectations on that property. He has agreed to make the exterior of the building presentable, and in the meantime, he's getting an engineer to evaluate the structure to determine whether or not he can save it or whether or not he needs to raise it.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Fire Command Assistance to the Town of Johnston. Is there a report from the administration?
The fire chief is here to address the concerns regarding this. I do want to point out that the concern with mutual aid regarding injured on duty for firefighters working in other communities, Mr. Valletta is right, that is always a concern, but that is a concern with any mutual aid operation that we have. And if that's something that is always on the table, frankly, every time we go into Providence, every time we go into Warwick. An injured on duty during mutual aid is is owned by the city for whom that firefighter works. So, yes, that is a question, but I'm going to let Chief Gumbly address the situation with Johnston more specifically.
Okay. Before you do that, Chief, Robin, is there any financial impact to the city of Cranston when we do outside of mutual aid work to
Well,
Johnston?
in mutual aid work, there is, and the chief's going to address his belief on this as mutual aid. But in situations, any time that a deputy chief goes into any mutual aid situation, whether it's Johnston, West Warwick, Providence, Warwick, whenever we send a deputy chief, there may be an overtime callback. So it is not unusual that there is a cost to mutual aid anyway. No different than if someone comes in and helps us, whatever their contract says, they may have to pay their deputy chief. So that's the whole point of mutual aid. There is a cost to all communities involved with it. I mean, it's a discussion, it's a discussion separate and apart from the specifics of tonight's issue. The whole notion of mutual aid brings with it all sorts of issues. But on the flip side, if you don't have it and your community needs help, you know, you have a problem as well.
All right.
And it's governed by the state. But I would defer to the chief on that.
Wait a minute, one other question. I mean, before we
Yep.
get into the whole mutual aid thing with the chief here, I want to clearly say for the record that we've had mutual aid problems with Providence, where we've responded numerous times to their situations where we don't get that response back. So we're doing additional runs to Providence, and now we're adding Johnston on top of that. So
Well-
now we're doing additional work to Johnston.
We've had
So we
mutual aid
become-
to Johnston right along. We've had mutual
Correct.
aid with Johnston all along. And Providence has been, I mean, at one point, it was 16 rescue runs to 1 for Providence, for 1 return. However, I will say that I believe Providence has since put in another rescue, and that number has declined to some degree. When we talk about the risks of firefighters going into other communities, when our firefighters go into Providence, there are certain risks that they do not face necessarily in West Warwick, or Johnston. There are a whole host of different situations.
I just don't want to get into the problem having a multi-jurisdictional fire department.
Well, that certainly is not the intent, nor is that the case, and nor at this point, you know, when we talk about consolidation and regionalization, the mayor has been very clear that any talks of that type of action would be very carefully thought about, because we don't want our resources being drawn into necessarily a city like Providence. It's going to take more than it gives in return.
Exactly. Thank you. Councilman Navarro.
Thank you, Councilman Pelletier. Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Schutt regarding this issue, and you know, you mentioned a mutual aid, and I follow that, and mutual aid is something that 2 communities benefit from. You know, the other community would come over and help when we have other, don't have the manning or the staffing. But in this particular case, is North Providence going to provide, or say Johnson, are they going to provide any mutual aid to us?
They do. We currently have mutual aid agreements with all of our bordering cities. We already have a mutual aid. There's a mutual aid agreement. I believe it's a statewide agreement, and the chief certainly knows more about this than I do. But we already have a mutual aid. I've looked out and seen a West Warwick rescue in Cranston, or a Johnston rescue can come in. I mean, it's not uncommon. So we already have a mutual aid agreement with them. It's a statewide, state-designated agreement.
Okay.
Okay.
So no, just to follow up though, but knowing the situation over there, why has the administration made that decision, or the mayor made that decision to, you know, have our command staff, because they don't have any over there, you know, now we're going to be responsible for helping out, you know, Johnson's situation, when in fact, you know, they have the resources there, and they have the manpower there, but that mayor is utilizing, I should say, backdooring or figuring a way out not to have to use his resources, and then it's you know, it's filtering over to us. So I just would like to understand, you know, the reasoning behind
Yeah,
that.
I'll tell you exactly the reasoning behind it. The fire chief talked to me about the fact that Johnston, on occasion, may need the services of a chief on a site on something that is, you know, in Johnston, no different than we would ever offer mutual aid. I asked the fire chief, would that be like mutual aid? He said yes. We said okay. Frankly, the politics of it right now, to me, this is a mutual aid situation. This is something not much different than we've done right along. It just happens that it's at the level of a chief, so you're hearing about it more. But as the chief has indicated to me, even when we send a rescue, there are times that we would send a deputy chief along anyway. It's not unusual.
So, given the fact, I mean, we don't have any information regarding it. Hopefully, we're going to get it from the chief. I mean, is there going to be a time limit, or is there like something that the mayor, both mayors are working out, where saying, well, I'm trying to work out my situation, it might be 6 months, a year?
Unless you want to end mutual aid. I mean, again, this is mutual aid. There's no time limit on mutual aid. I mean, when Johnston calls us and says, we need a rescue or we need a ladder truck, we send it. When we call them and say it, they send it to us. I mean, I think it's a slippery slope or a dangerous slope you go down if you start pulling apart aspects of mutual aid, because we could be on the other end of that as well if we need it. And I don't want to get into a situation where we become isolationists.
I just want to understand, because from what I heard from Mr. Valletta, is that they're choosing not to make, you know, I don't want to say promote or whatever, have acting people move up in the ranks in order to fulfill those positions. So I just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I understand mutual aid, but this seems that you know,
but years,
Providence, it sounds a lot more political, you know, than actually helping each other out based on mutual aid. I mean, obviously, you know, we're not going to turn down a municipality when they're in need, but I mean, this seems that this is something that the city of Johnston's creating, and it's involving our fire department as far as a labor issue that's going on over there. And I just want to make sure that you know, we're not getting caught in a political situation, because that's what right now it sounds like it might be. But I'd like to hear, and furthermore, hopefully there is no impact financially to the city. But you know, the fact that they have the resources and the staffing, I think you know, it really tends to you know, we're not here to do political situations.
That's a good point, and I will say this to you: mutual aid, to some degree, has always been tied up with politics. The reason we did 16 runs to 1 run to Providence was that the city of Providence wouldn't put another rescue on. I believe the Providence Fire Union fought that for years and years and years. Mr. Valletta would know certainly better than I did. They wanted another rescue in that area. Political, whatever the powers that were in Providence didn't do it. We didn't say, oh, guess what, we're not going to go to Providence on 16 runs because if they put another rescue in, it would solve the problem. That's their political issue. In the meantime, if they needed us, we went. They have since put on another rescue. That's reduced. So, I mean, you know, the line of whether it's politics or not, you could argue that every department, I'm sure Mr. Valletta wouldn't mind this, every argument should expand so there's never a need for mutual aid. Then you'd have all these extra firefighters if there was a disaster, you know, that were ready to go. I mean, the spirit of mutual aid is that you staff to what you have to staff to, you know, to survive, and if you need somebody to fill in, you do. But again, I understand your point about politics, but then I would argue that if that's the case, all those years that we covered Providence, that was politics too, because somebody, politics, budgets, whatever you want to call it, not you personally, but whatever anybody wants to call it, mutual aid potentially could always get caught up in that argument. Because it is, anytime you offer services inter-municipality, you may run into that.
Thank you, Reverend. Councilman Santa Maria, is it something you can wait
I was
till-
going to ask the chief through you, if I could ask the chief a quick question, or do you want to let him?
Well, we're going to have the chief speak anyway.
All right, so could I ask him a question after he's done?
Chief, you want to step up?
James Gumley, Fire Chief. Paul Valletta is right. The Cranston firefighters have made significant concessions. They've done a great job, and there is labor unrest in Johnston. But if they have a fire and they need help, I think we have an obligation to provide it. Mutual aid. Mutual aid should be mutual. It is with Johnston. There's no imbalance. We provide mutual aid to Johnston on an occasional basis. We have not yet provided any mutual aid under this Command Assistance Pact. The fire chief resigned in mid-January, and right now the search is underway for a new chief. It should be concluded within a month or so. They have candidates, they're starting to interview those candidates. If they refuse to do anything, then I could see a need for us to draw the line and say no help to you. But they are moving forward with a plan.
Councilman Santa Maria.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Chief, then you consider this mutual aid, by your definition, you consider this a mutual aid situation?
I think this is mutual aid, one, because the infrequency, it hasn't happened often, not at all in this case. And two, they're working on a plan to resolve it.
This is how I look at it. I look at it that they had a dispute.
Yep.
The mayor took over, appointed someone who's not related to the fire department at all as his second in command, and they're going to be doing their job. They're not experienced in it like you are, or the deputy chief of the city of Cranston, or anybody. Those top two people are not experienced in fire safety or anything like that. So I really feel like we're doing their job for them. They should be making decisions rather quickly and not waiting for. I kind of think it's a mutual aid situation in that if there was a fire, God forbid, we go over and help them. I have no problem with that. I think we're getting involved in more than a mutual aid situation. It looks to me more like we're helping them out while they do this stand with the unions. Do we need to be doing that? I'd rather have you here. You're our fire chief. I'd rather have our fire department here. We have our own issues here. I have an uncomfort zone with this. It seems to me like it's not even a Providence situation where they need our help because of the problems they have. This doesn't seem like a mutual aid the way I define it as a mutual aid.
Councilman Arquette.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Just a couple of questions, Chief. Our mutual aid agreement, is it a statewide or is it FEMA brought? I mean, FEMA has a mutual aid also, correct?
Yes, there's a Southern New England Mutual Aid Plan that's administered by Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency, and all the cities and towns participate in that plan.
So it's a state policy or principle?
It's a state-administered plan with local input.
All right, thank you. In my viewpoint, I think the mayor of Johnston is trying to circumvent the union process by withholding promotion, and I'm very reluctant for Cranston to get involved in that. However, we do have this mutual agreement pact with the city, so for the town of Johnston. So it's very difficult. I know you're in a precarious situation, but I would hate for Cranston to get involved in a political scene instead of a scene that we need to be there for a disaster. That's my point. Thank you.
Councilman Favicchio.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Pelletier. Chief, what kind of involvement do we have with other departments with regard to chief level or assistants or, this type of administrative help?
I'll admit, this is unusual that they specifically calling for a chief. Normally, at a mutual aid, they may call for assets like a fire engine or a ladder truck, and we send the chief officer with those assets. So, for instance, if the city of Warwick had a fire and they requested, an engine and a ladder, we would send a chief officer with them to help our companies there on the scene.
And how much time do we actually spend with Johnston? I mean, are we expending a tremendous amount of time, or is this
No, not with Johnston, no.
And do they provide any aid to us on occasion?
Yes, they have. The Edgewood Yacht Club fire, they sent the fire engine and a chief officer to the scene.
Thank you, Chief. Councilman Donahue.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Thank you, Chief, for being here tonight. I just have one question for you, actually.
Okay.
And it's a clarifying question. So what you're saying is, since this started in January and we're 2 months into it, there hasn't been a call for command level mutual aid from Johnston to Cranston.
That is correct.
And the expectation is that the search for the new chief will be concluded within the next month.
Yes.
And so your feeling is that there should be no material impact.
I can't guarantee that. There could be a material impact, but
we're about 2/3 of the way through
that is
the
correct,
general
though.
agreement.
That's correct. The instructions there, they have a battalion chief always on duty in that city, and their instructions were to use discretion in calling for command assistance.
Good. Thank you.
Councilman Navarro.
Hi, Chief. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, Councilman.
Thanks for you can make it here tonight. I have one question regarding, just to follow up with Councilman Favicchio. So is this the first type of mutual aid of this kind as far as command staff in the state?
This is the first time I've been involved with it, yes.
So when you mention mutual aid, really involves trucks, the equipment, things of that nature as far as mutual aid is concerned?
Typically, yes.
So so as far as chief, mutual aid to have, because they don't have a chief, That's...
It's unusual, certainly
that's
unusual.
unusual. All right, well, the good thing that I've heard is that this is going to come to a conclusion hopefully within a month, and we don't have to be involved in this anymore, because I do feel that this is more of a political situation, and you're put in a very difficult situation. I think we understand that, and we don't want to deny aid to any municipality in time of need or a disaster or anything like that, an emergency. So, but as far as, you know, how this is being done as far as a command staff mutual aid, I mean, I don't know, you mentioned the PAC. I mean, is that something that we're gonna have when, you know, let's say we have a deputy chief retire or something, is Johnston are we gonna have mutual aid from them while we're looking for a deputy chief? Or, I mean, is this where this might be going, or is this like something that, is that something that could happen?
The thing about mutual aid, you can always say no. You can say no. You have the right to say no. And if this was a long-term operation where they're drawing our resources and taking advantage of us, I would say, you know, let's stop it. I'm not sure we've reached that point yet.
Thank you, Chief.
Seeing no other questions, moving on to council member communications. Several reports have been requested from the administration tonight. I would ask for their reports at this time, starting with the police and fire false alarm fees.
We have collected in the police false alarm account $42,575.
What was that? I'm sorry, Robin.
$42,575 for police, and $3,500 for fire. The fire chief and I have talked about the fact that some have been billed and there's been non-payment, so we're going to have to start going after some of those. But there have been more police false alarms than fire. Typically what happens is house alarms go to police, so if somebody sets off the alarm in their house a couple times, that's a police first responder, not fire.
Correct. Now, Robin, I had tentatively earmarked that money for the allocation, because we cut the line item in the budget for police vehicles and fire apparatus, and the intent of that ordinance was to allocate that funding to purchase equipment
Yep.
for those agencies.
I understand that. However, they're not restricted revenue accounts, and to be honest with you, with the purchasing freeze on, anything that's in a general fund revenue account will be absorbed to offset snow removal, any overages we have elsewhere, like any other revenue account. If we get a lot of money in building inspections, for example, Stan doesn't get to use it for his department, it gets absorbed. But I would like to point out, we also have the rescue run billing, which goes toward the purchase of a rescue if we need that. So we do have an account. We did purchase a rescue this year. And I would also like to point out that there have been 17 police cars added to the fleet already this year. The 5 that the council budgeted for, and 12 that were obtained through extremely good grant work. 3 of the school resource officer Chargers that you see.
Yes.
And the other 9 were marked cruisers that I believe it was Lieutenant Loisel and Major Ryan worked extremely hard to get. So at this point, frankly, to justify more than the purchase of 17 cars in these economic times when we've got overages in other departments, you know, it's just not fiscally prudent to purchase more at this point.
So that revenue that we've been generating from those 2 ordinances have been going back into the general fund?
Well, they're in a line item right now, but like anything else, any other revenue account, unless it's a restricted revenue account. For instance, the animal control has a restricted revenue account. Forfeiture money are restricted revenue accounts. So those can be used for certain parameters that are outlined by that. We run into a problem with the auditors if we start earmarking money that are in the general fund. So that'll get absorbed, and in fourth quarter transfers, you'll see that, you know, will help offset the cost, let's say, of some of the overage, again, on something, for example, like snow removal. We could argue that a lot of line items right now might have revenue overages. I can guarantee you I'm not going to let them offset on purchase. Mr. Liberatore's here, was here, our Parks and Rec director. You know, he might have a revenue overage. That doesn't mean he gets to buy more of something else. Right now, nobody's getting to buy anything, frankly. And as I said, I just think very reasonably 17 new police vehicles, and that does not include all the unmarks that have been purchased out of forfeiture money, I think is pretty good in these economic times, and I applaud the grant writing abilities of that department. And with the rescue situation, we had the rescue billing. that we were able to purchase a rescue squad out of. So we've been able to keep those fleets alive. And I just, at this point, frankly, can't justify the purchase of any more items like that at this point, you know, given unexpected snow and, you know, all the things that do come up in a budget.
Okay. Thank you, Robin. Councilman Navarro.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Pelletier, you're the head of the Finance Committee, so you could allocate, this is extra revenue that was never there. If I recall in the past, with this ordinance that you're talking about, basically you raised the fees. I think the ordinance did apply to fire, but police had a line item that was zeroed out. It was never collected any revenue. So from what I see here, there's an extra $45,000 of extra revenue that's in that line item.
Correct.
If it was done correctly. So, I mean, there should be a plus in that budget line item. And, I mean, if you'd like to make some, you know, put some towards vehicles, I mean, that's, you know, finance chair, you can make those decisions and let it go through the council. But I do have to say that it is very, it is good to see that extra revenue has been generated ever since that ordinance was put in effect and raised the fees. And, but I just wanted, it is money that's in a line item, but obviously, you know, as finance chair, you can make those kind of decisions.
If I might, however, we also have revenue line items that are under budget in different departments. That doesn't mean we don't purchase the things that those department needs. And I would point out that you can, as a council, budget all you want. Nobody can make me spend the money, and the mayor has not ordered me to spend money. The mayor has ordered me to stop that. So that's where we're at. I mean, it's a harsh decision, and I would love to buy 20 police cars. I'd love to buy 20 highway. I mean, talk about a need for vehicles. Port Gerard Scotty's, I just got a report that every bed for a new truck for a plow vehicle is $20,000 for trucks that I'm lucky if they're still worth $8,000. I mean, we're weighing critical decisions here. 17 new cars by the Creative Resources, 12 of them by the Creative Resources of the guys in that department. Great work on their part. That's all we could give. One new rescue, that's what we can give. I mean, these aren't the times of excess. I wish we could buy 20 police cars. I wish I could buy 2 rescues and an engine. You know, I mean, we just can't do it.
Right.
So
The gross fact is that all of our departments need equipment.
absolutely.
You know, I'm not going to dispute that.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the intent of that ordinance was to generate revenue for that department, for those 2 departments.
And in better times, if we were in a situation, or if we were in a situation, let's say, where we needed to buy a rescue, and the chief came to me and said, we're about, you know, $2,000 short of the purchase, and that alarm account has $3,500. Can we kind of rely on that money to offset the cost? In a normal circumstance, I would say absolutely yes. The spirit of that is that's what those revenue accounts are great for. And we look within intra-department for those types of things throughout the year. But once we get to this point where we're looking at a budget, we're looking at $1.1 million, $1.2 million in snow removal, if we don't get another snow or ice storm, which now we're, you know, $500,000 or $600,000 over what was budgeted, we got to make that up.
Right.
So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Robin.
Yep.
Councilman Stichels, administration report on status of zoning revisions.
I know that the different members of the administration have been meeting about revising the zoning code, and I wondered if you could give me an idea of how that was going, when it might be done, what the scope of it is.
Yep, happy to do that. I spoke with Mr. Peichel, building official, and to Peter Lapola as well. Once a week, they sit down on zoning. Stan and Peter work together. They've identified and listed as many principal uses as they can come up with. Everything creative that they can think of that might be a use that's going to be targeted. They have identified as many as they think they possibly can, and now they are actually defining them. So they have to identify what may be a use. For instance, the massage parlor one, massage therapy, is one that's on the hot table, not massage parlor, massage therapy, sorry, is on the table right now. So now what they have to do is they define that as a potential, they come up with that as a potential use, and then they have to write a definition for it. What will fall into the category of massage therapy, i.e. massage parlor or, you know, chiropractic therapy or whatever they want to do. So they're halfway through writing those definitions. It's an arduous process. And they're about halfway through that. And then that would get adopted by the council. And then they're looking at, for instance, for example, the therapeutic massage is the one they mentioned, and similar operations to be permitted in certain zones. So first they identify the uses, then they have to write the definitions for each of those uses, and then they have to decide which zones those uses will be allowed in. They are now midway through the definition phase. It's a long process.
One second, Councilman Stichels.
So,
1 second, Councilman Stichels. Joey's changed the tape. By March.
so is the revision just on the uses? Is it going to be looking at parking at all, for instance?
It what?
Is it going to look at parking at all, or is it just looking
No,
at
this is use codes. These are use codes. Now, included in that, when something, for instance, they may have a use that they may have to determine for that use how many parking spots would be needed. But that becomes a more specific issue as the time goes on. Right now, they're looking at the broad uses that are out there. And for instance, there might be a use code that, you know, if a restaurant needs so many parking spaces for every person that's going to sit there, that would be part of the definitions, I would imagine, to some degree.
So when might this be finished? Any idea?
I would imagine this is going to take a few more months. This is a huge project. And we really don't want to rush it because we don't want to miss uses and then piecemeal them in after. It's much better to have it done in one group so you can get a broad picture of the dynamics, where these zones are in the city, that certain things would be allowed, what's currently allowed. I mean, it gets down to the nitty-gritty of, you know, can somebody teach piano lessons at their house? The zoning code is complex, so it will be a long process. But they're on it.
All right. Thank you.
Trash? Trash. I did do a little bit of research on that January 31st date that you had asked about. They give a report, by the way. Waste Management generates a report every day of areas that they did not have recyclables out and what they did not pick up and why. And if they did not do a no bin, no pickup on any particular street, why. Fairweather was the one, Fairview, I believe, is the one street that you said was significant on January 31st?
No, I think the only thing I said was that the only place they didn't pick up the trash where there were no recycling bins was my block.
Right, but you had done a 20 out of 23 houses in, I think, the Fairview
Right.
area. That street, for example, the recyclable truck could not, and I'll give you just as an example, January 31st was in the midst of having our roads somewhat narrowed because of snow. The recycle truck could not get down that street. So whether people had their recycles out or not, their trash got picked up because you have a two-man crew that can turn the truck around. But even if they didn't have recycles out, nobody would have noticed the difference because recycles couldn't get picked up that day. So, I mean, they marked down, for instance, one particular address, no recycling. Another address, no recycling. They don't pick those up and they cite those people. So, I mean, I have a 2-page list of everybody that they didn't pick up and why.
Well, why were there so many 20 out of 23 where they didn't follow the code?
Because if, for example, the recycle truck couldn't get down that street.
Right, but that's one street, although they were on a wide range of streets.
Yeah.
And no one got a sticker, no one had their trash left there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've got a 2-page list of people who got stickers.
Yeah, but I gave you a 2-page list.
And
of
what I'm
people who
saying to
didn't
you
get
is there
stickers.
may have been reasons why certain trucks couldn't have gotten down certain roads at that time. I mean, I'm not, and a lot of those were on one street.
No, Robin, you got to go back and look at that, because they were on a wide range of streets. And as you and I talked, before there was any snow, I put my own trash out with no recycling bin, and they picked up the trash. That's happened with other neighbors of mine.
Yep.
So I don't know what they're giving you, but I don't know, and I don't know what I have to do to convince you that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, I don't disagree that there may be homes that they don't do it all the time, what they're supposed to be doing. But what I am saying to you is that we certainly have very long lists on a given day of people who are getting stickers and whose trash is not getting picked up because they're not leaving their recycling out.
Well,
I mean, Steve Akabuchi drives around neighborhoods and follows the trucks around.
Well, when I go to I went to a conference, the League of Cities and Towns.
Yes, I'm aware of
conference,
that.
And I brought this up, and afterwards, the head of recycling for the state, who happens to live not in Cranston, but across the street from Cranston, said to me, "I'm not at all surprised by what you're saying. I see it across the street all the time." So what would it take to convince you that there's a problem?
I'm not saying that there's not a problem, but what I'm saying to you is that we address it as best as we can with Mr. Akabuchi following trucks around, and Mr. Demola out and citing people routinely. We are on top of waste management on a routine basis. I'm certainly aware that you were very vocal at Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns that we were unsuccessful in our program. But I would also argue that we've significantly increased our recycling and diversion rate over the past 2 years.
And I wouldn't argue with that at all.
So we
Just
do
it
work
could
on
be
it.
higher.
It's certainly imperfect. I am aware of that.
Well, have you asked Waste Management about those cases other than the Ferncrest Avenue?
The specific,
Yeah, that on, over a 2-week period, 20 out of 23.
I will say this, I have one Ferncrest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on Ferncrest that show no recycling. So they documented that there was no recycling there. So according to this,
But they didn't give anybody stickers.
I'm not sure. Well, I'm surprised they didn't because they documented that those people didn't have recycling. So somebody
I
took
guess
note
I'd like
that there
you
was
to
no
ask them-
recycling.
I'd like you to ask them where if
Okay.
they're giving out the stickers.
Yep, that I
'cause
will, because they have Ferncrest documented as one of their no recycle streets, a bunch of 8 or 9 houses on that street that did not have recycling out. It is documented, so somebody took note, one of the drivers took note. So what happens, it may be that John DeMola then follows up separately with a letter to these homes, and I will find out if he did. And you'll find out because you'll know the people who were part of your test.
Who is supposed to leave the sticker? Is it the trash pickup or the recycling pickup?
It would have to be the trash pickup, because the trash pickups are the critical factor. If the recycle's not out, the trash doesn't get picked up. Recycle always gets picked up.
Okay, so in this case.
It should be the
on
trash
Ferncrest-
people who leave it.
On Ferncrest, right?
Right.
Assuming what you're saying is accurate, we know that the trash truck went down,
Mhm.
it picked up the trash,
Mhm.
it may have written it down on the sheet, but nobody got a warning.
And that's what I'll follow up on. But it may be that DeMola then sends a letter separately from City Hall if they didn't get a sticker. That's what I have to find out. Is it always a sticker or is it sometimes a letter? And you'll know because those people will or will not get letters.
Right. Well,
And I'll follow up with
no
that.
one has said to me that they've gotten a letter.
Okay. And I would
Or a
also.
sticker.
Huh?
Or a sticker.
Okay. You know, I even have people, I have one on Magnolia Street that shows a mixed recycling. So they didn't pick it up because they had mixed their recycling. So, I mean, it may depend on the driver, it may depend on who's on top of their job on that day, who's on their game. Unfortunately, the waste management employees specifically don't work for me. Waste management as a company works for us. So we can get on them as a company, but it really becomes incumbent on them to deal with their own staff's shortfalls. It's a challenge. I don't disagree with you, it's certainly not perfect.
Okay.
Councilman Favicchio.
Vice Chairman, Rob, I'd like to ask you one question. Have you received any written complaints from people working in those neighborhoods? Does anyone have a written complaint identifying the date that they didn't have this trash picked up? So that you may cross-reference that against the list that you received?
Yeah, I have to tell you, unfortunately, the majority of complaints I get are the other way. My trash didn't get picked up today. Well, did you have your recycling out? No. I brought my bins in too early. I mean, what happens is we still have the people on the other spectrum the non-compliance people who call us and complain. I'll have to look. I don't recall a situation. We occasionally will get a call from someone who says, hey, my neighbor's trash got picked up and he didn't have his recycle bins out. We have occasional calls like that. I would say, I might get in a month 2 or 3 of those. But most people, it's the other way. I brought my bins in too early, and that's why on windy days, by the way, we relax it because people will bring their bins in either way, and we really don't want the trash blowing around. It's very rare. I don't recall one written complaint on that.
Councilman Stichels, 1 second. Just to let you know that I actually had an incident, or a few incidents in my ward, and I actually sat down with Waste Management, and some of the things that they had indicated, sometimes they have a new driver, sometimes there's the regular guy's sick, sometimes there's a guy filling in, so he might not know the policy or interpret the policy differently. So that could explain why some people get picked up and some people don't. But the guy said to me, the district director said to me, he says, you can control some of them some of the time, but you can't control all of them all the time. So sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. It is a hit or miss, but I agree that it might be something that we could do to convince them to comply with the policy. Moving on. Yes, Councilman Stichels.
I have just one other issue with the tax assessment board. I don't know if you want me to
Yes.
bring that up now?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if it'd be Robin or Bob. How do they get, what's the process in which they get paid for a meeting? Who approves the payment, and how does that work?
Go through payroll? Must go through payroll, like any other board. Right, they would submit it to payroll. It would get, that would be a payroll function. It wouldn't come across us. It would get submitted to payroll. I would assume Sal must get it probably comes through Sal's office.
Okay, well, I would just like to alert you that we did get minutes from their most recent meeting on, or from their February 18th meeting, and they should not be paid for this meeting. According to their minutes, the meeting was called to order at 2:32, and it was adjourned at 3 o'clock. So that was a 28-minute meeting. And the code says quite specifically that they get paid subject to the following conditions. This is 308050. And one of the conditions is meetings shall be of no less than 1 hour duration. All right, so I hope.
Councilman Stichels, I believe that we're going to be, you and I are going to be sitting down to review that whole ordinance on how they get paid. So rather than bring the question up in front of the administration, I think that you and I should need to address the actual code, right?
Well, I want to make sure they don't get paid for this. I mean, they meet for this meeting because we haven't had any record like this because they haven't been keeping minutes. But they meet, I don't know, what is it, 120 times a year, and we see that they meet for 28 minutes, and they get paid $50 each. That's about $100 an hour, and that's a violation of the code if they're paid. So
hell of a racket. Mr. Strom.
Yeah, a couple of, just my reaction to that is sometimes councilmen meetings go over an hour and they still get paid just $50. So if you look at it as an average, they seem to balance off. The other thing or point that I want to make is that sometimes if a meeting's only a half hour and they've concluded their business and the meeting with the taxpayer is concluded, it doesn't make sense that they just sit there for a half an hour just to suffice the hour requirement. If there's no other activity and no other discussions going forward for a half hour, why should they just remain there just to accommodate the ordinance or the charter?
If I also could follow up on that, one of the things with this board, and again, you know, it's a little hard for the administration to be addressing this. This is a council-appointed board, and it's an important board, and it provides a balance between the assessor's office and the council. But what I would like to also point out is these people take these appraisals home. They run them through their own MLS networks that they pay for on their own through their own real estate businesses. There's a lot of work, preparation work done before and after. Can that all be documented necessarily by that 28-minute meeting? And I don't know the parameters of that meeting or what was on the agenda, no. But again, I think as Councilman Pelletier, Council Vice President Pelletier pointed out, if you all want to readdress the way this is paid and have it paid on an hourly basis instead of a per meeting basis, whatever the council decides, that's certainly your call. But again, I would remind you that you are talking about people who do dedicate more time than what is necessarily on that paper. You know, I mean, you want to make it an all-volunteer board, make it a all-volunteer board. You know, that's certainly under the purview of the council. We won't argue with you on that. That's you know, within your purview. But I would, again, I get concerned when there are comments made that are insinuating that people are taking something they don't deserve. And I understand your concern about that. But I also have to counter that with the fact that I know that the people do put hours of their own time in as well.
Okay.
And so, again, maybe that's why we do need to readdress the payment structure.
Councilman Stichels, 1 second. Just to let you know that that particular meeting that you're reading the minutes from is to establish the rules and regulations of the committee. That's why it was only 30 minutes and not the standard hour. and we will not hold up any processing of payments for the members of that board. So let's sit down and address that actual ordinance to get that straightened out, then we can go forward with anything else. Moving on.
Wait a
Councilman Santa Maria.
Well,
Councilman Santa Maria.
I had my hand up here, Councilman Pelletier. I don't think that you have the authority to overrule an ordinance.
What ordinance?
The ordinance that says they get paid if the meeting lasts an hour. And you can argue that ordinance should be changed. You can argue that it should be something else. But right now, that's the ordinance. And as far as, gee, we don't want the meeting if they don't have anything to meet on, they're meeting, if they meet 120 times a year, sometimes they're meeting 3 times a week.
Thank you, Councilman Stichels.
All right? But you cannot negate
Thank
an
you.
ordinance from that chair.
Thank you. Councilman Santa Maria.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Safe Routes to School, I got a report in my packet on the funding for the sign, so I'm good with that. The salt barn, obviously, was updated by the administration. I do have a couple that I'd like to add. I talked to Evan Kirschenbaum earlier today. Could we please get someone over and talk to the people at 1590 Plainfield Circle? They still haven't got answers. They haven't got any information. They're in the dark.
Did
So
they go to Anna Marino and go through the claims process as they were supposed to?
They're still waiting for a
They
check.
filed a Freedom of Information Act. We are working on complying with that. They were told what they would have to do to give claim, to apply for a claim. I mean,
Okay.
we have worked
But
with
wait, when I talked to Evan, said he would call for, they just don't know where to go next. And
Let me first
obviously-
say this about this subject, Councilman Santa Maria. I mean this as a compliment. This shows how good of a councilman you are, because you keep bringing this up to me, and if there's ever a councilman who's dedicated to the members of his ward, it's definitely you. I'll start off by saying, and I mean that in all sincerity, but this process has gone like a long way from where we started. When I first talked to these people, I told them to detail what they wanted from the city, and that I myself would walk it to claims and introduce it as a claim. In lieu of that, they came to the city council and asked very capable council attorney, Mr. Quinlan, about how to file a Freedom of Information Act request. We have the Freedom of Information Act request, and a letter was sent back to them with various estimates that are allowed under the statute in terms of time and manpower it's going to take to respond to that request. So, in my opinion, the horse has kind of left the barn on just sitting down with them. I mean, I still will call them. I told you I would.
That's
I
why
promise
you
you.
can do it. Just call
I will
them
call
and
them
get
and I will
updates.
try to understand again. My first communication with her, just so you understand, everyone understands this. I said, will you please detail for me each and every instance that you feel where the city or someone else has failed you, and what the basis of that claim is, so I could kind of understand who and why they were alleging was responsible for the harm that they suffered. Because, of course, without believing that the city is at fault or someone else is at fault, we don't pay claims just because of hardship. So first I have to understand from them what is the nature of the harm they allege, and is there a good faith basis to believe that the city is at fault for it. Without that, I would be undertaking on the city's dime a fact-finding mission on behalf of the constituent, hiring experts and things like that to essentially prove a claim against ourselves, which I'm not really willing to do at this point. So again, I will talk with her, and you know, in terms of anyone in your ward, I will tell them you have their back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And their face.
Also, while I have you up there, through the chair, through the vice president,
Go ahead.
the executive session that we're supposed to have for the illegal sewer tie-ins.
Oh, yeah. That's being worked on with, I've been in communication with Chairman Navarro, and we should have a date on that shortly.
Okay.
Yeah, we have
Thank you for your
Several
fine,
of them, thank-
thank
yeah.
you for your fine job as Assistant City
Well, there's no
Solicitor.
question, and you as well.
Councilman Santa Maria, you're all set with the salt barn issue, right? You're all set with the salt
Salt
barn?
barn's all set. Thank you
can
very
remove
much.
that from the docket for next month? Yes, remove the salt barn. Councilman Arquette with Council Communications.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Under communications, I just would like to ask Dr. Shutt a couple of questions, if that's okay?
Dr. Shutt?
You made reference earlier, Dr. Shutt, to the snow removal. It's a $1.1 million deficit, is that correct?
There was approximately $560,000 in the general fund line items for it, and I believe it's about $260 in the contingency, still in the contingency. So putting aside the contingency, it's about $565,000.
$565,000?
Between $550,000 and $600,000 right now.
Thank you.
But again, that's providing.
And we just learned tonight, we just learned tonight the school committee is $3.5 billion in the hole, correct? We learned that tonight.
Is that their numbers or our numbers?
Councilman, they were voting on that tonight. I haven't seen the final numbers.
All right, we'll wait on that. Last question. Are there any other holes in the budget at this time? Are there any, for example, the car tax revenue, is that at par? Is that a shortfall? Or where are we right now? And so our revenue stream is on par, is that the information? And you'll have that for the next council meeting, as far as any holes in the budget anywhere?
Well, there are some holes. The other shortfall is primarily in the electricity, lighting, and street line item. So that and snow removal are, right now, our two primary areas. Other areas are over.
And you'll have more, better facts and numbers for me at the next March council meeting?
We've got a monthly financials that come to you from
Yep.
Trigo that also will show that you can see each line item.
All right, thank you.
There are items in addition over, but there are items that are under as well.
I understand. I was just wondering where the largest holes were, so we can act appropriately come budget time. Okay, thank you, Dr. Shutt. Thank you, Vice President Pelletier.
Moving on to old business. Proceed with the introduction of new business, as there is no old business this evening. New business. Ms. Wall, city clerk, please address the new business.
New business, Council President, the resolutions I will submit to Clerk Wall.
Please submit it to the clerk, please. It's Paul. Yeah, all right, well, just take it downstairs and do it next month.
Through the chair, shall I go through the business that I have prepared?
Go ahead, Ms. Wall.
Proposed ordinance 02-11-1. This is an ordinance amending Title V of the Code regarding business licenses and regulations, and it establishes a licensing requirement for massage therapy establishments. It's to be referred to Safety Services for hearing on April 4th. Proposed ordinance 2-11-2. This is an amendment of Chapter 17 of the Code regarding zoning. It's for a zone change petition filed for property located on Situate Avenue, Sundale Road, and Charlie Drive. That's to be referred to the Ordinance Committee for hearing also on April 14th. Proposed ordinance 02-11-3, an amendment of Title 17, again entitled zoning. This is for zoning reform regarding several different sections in there pertaining to procedure and several other areas. This is also to be referred to Ordinance Committee for hearing on April 14th. Resolution of the City Council in support of amendment of Rhode Island General Law 17-11-1 regarding voting districts and officials. This is to be referred to the Finance Committee for hearing on March 17th. Resolution establishing new local sewer user disposal limits. This is also to be referred to the Public Works Committee for hearing on March 17th. Resolution approving the transfer of land located at 1117 Pontiac Avenue to the City of Cranston. This is with regard to a pumping station located on that property. This is to be referred to the Public Works Committee for hearing on March 17th. We've also received a request from the Chief Justice of the Municipal Court in accordance with our City Code 2.40.060, submitting dates for the establishing the court calendar for 2011. This is to be referred to the Ordinance Committee for hearing on March 17th. I have the following. The following are property damage claims. These are all to be referred to the Claims Committee for hearing on February 28th. I'm sorry. Yeah, today's March 7th. Yeah. Christina Calderon for an incident on February 10th. Crisano Pompey for an incident on February 4th. Kirsten Neer for an incident on February 3rd. Jean Ardente for an incident on January 13th. These are all of 2011, excuse me. Kristen Ruggiero for an incident on February 9, 2011. Raymond Lefebvre for an incident on February 11th, 2011. Herbert Gray for an incident on February 3rd, 2011. Jason Burgess for an incident on January 22, 2011. Timothy Gregson for an incident on February 9, 2011. Robert Chatfield for an incident on February 2, 2011. Deborah Spagnoli for an incident on January 12, 2011. Donald Salvatore Jr. for an incident on January 27, 2011. Dawn and Thomas Perota for an incident on January 21, 2011. Philip Hayden for an incident on January 18, 2011. John Foley Jr. for an incident on December 26, 2010. Janet Frum for an incident on January 25, 2011. Vincent and Judith Levros for an incident on January 25, 2011. Franco and Pasqualina Agristi for an incident on February 1, 2011. Lorena Perez for an incident on February 7, 2011. Daniel Morella for an incident on February 8, 2011. Kevin Manny for an incident on February 10, 2011. Margaret Silvestri Healy for an incident on February 16, 2011. Derek Tester for an incident on January 11, 2011. Leon Pelletier for an incident on February 13, 2011. Joanne Fed for an incident on February 23, 2011. Joseph Mendonça for an incident on February 2, 2011. Daniel Seamus for an incident on February 19, 2011. And we have one personal injury claim from Susan Diaz for an incident on January 15, 2011. That's all, folks.
Is there a motion to refer the new business to committee stated by Ms. Wall? Motion been made by Councilman Navarro and seconded by Councilman Arquette. Any discussion? Clerk, please take the roll. Oh, wait a minute. Councilman Stichels.
Yep, I don't know, I'm on, as a co-sponsor on this massage ordinance, but I don't know anything about it.
What was that, Councilman Stichels?
Through the chair, that's my era.
One might say I don't have a good feeling about it.
I'll remove your name. There was some confusion. That ordinance was being discussed as the zoning ordinance. You had made an inquiry, and I will remove your name from that one.
Just to let you know that the purpose of that ordinance is to bring credibility to the profession, so. All right, clerk, please take the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Miscellaneous business on clerk's desk.
Through the chair.
Go ahead, clerk.
We also this evening, as the council members evidenced, Councilman Arquette has submitted 3 resolutions which he wishes to be considered for introduction. This is beyond the deadline in accordance with your rules. They should have been part of your packet, and you have the opportunity to vote on whether to accept them or refer them for entry in next month's meeting.
Second.
Ms. Wald, that was actually just handed. Yep. Councilman Arquette can address that. It wasn't actually scheduled for tonight as late business. It was supposed to be introduced next month. He's turning it in a month early.
Disregard.
Oh. So there is no motion and there is no second.
They're not going to introduce the next month.
So miscellaneous business on clerk's desk?
We have several matters. The conservation easement is we're still awaiting the executed copy. The Teamsters Local 2001 memorandum was received today, dated by the administration and the union. It's included in your packets. That will be removed from the docket.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion? We've got a motion to adjourn in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Oh, that's exactly where it would be located, too. Please don't even joke about that.